Congressman Brad Wenstrup. Welcome again to the Bill Cunningham Show. And Congressman, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Good to be with you, Bill.
All right, Congressman, this morning I'm watching some of the talk shows. It looks like incrementally, and you're on the House Intelligence Committee, and sadly it appears that every few hours the tanks, the armored personnel of this huge land-based army in the middle of Europe is marching to the west. It's happening incrementally. You're on the House Intelligence Committee. You probably get information the rest of us do not. So as we sit here this afternoon, can you kind of tell the American people what is the status of the Ukraine invasion into a sovereign nation? And what is the status and what does this mean? And why should America be involved at all?
Well, the bottom line really for Russia is that they don't feel that that Ukraine is a sovereign nation. And Russia is taking advantage of President Biden as the U.S. is a leader of free world. If you're pro-democracy, then you should be with the United States, and the United States should be with you. And that doesn't seem to be affecting President Putin at all, at least as far as leadership from the President of the United States. So officials were initially hesitant to say it, but this is now officially an invasion. I don't know what else to call it. The sanctions that you said you were going to put in place, put them in place. And we need to follow up. And Congress should be involved with those thought processes as well. But there needs to be severe consequences for Russia's actions. And I would just as soon make it economically, because I think that can have the most impact without losing life. But you got to be strong on the world stage, and we haven't seen the president doing that. This is a president of Russia that feels that the Soviet Union was his, and this should go back to whatever time in his life that he feels that this was part of his lore over people, but that they need to step back. We need to be strong. We need to be moving ahead. And because of the weakness of this administration, our adversaries in Beijing, Tehran, Moscow, they're all stronger today. It shows so far that he's incapable of standing up to Putin. One of the things that just totally blows me away is when he removed sanctions on their pipeline, which they can use to weaponize against Western Europe. And, he's even said things, well, if it's just a minor incursion, we might just let it go. This is wrong. This is wrong. And you know what he can do? How about if you had already, you've been in office a year, appoint a U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and put those sanctions in place and be preemptive to the things that Russia wants to do and know that, you know what, if I step out of line, I'm going to have trouble for my country, but we're not seeing that take place.
Congressman, it's almost nothing is reminiscent to Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. Anyone who makes references to that had better be careful, because there's no reference to the greatest crime in human history over the past 200 years and what happened there. One of the arguments used by Adolf Hitler in the mid-1930s was that there were Germanic peoples in other parts of Europe who needed protection. So he went into the Sudetenland. He went into Austria. So he said Germanic peoples, the Aryan peoples, genetics, they needed protection. So he expanded Germany, which started World War II, because there were Germanic peoples in other parts of Europe needed, quote, protection. Here we are 90 years later, and Vladimir Putin is saying because there's Russian-speaking people in Donetsk, which is the eastern section of the Ukraine, that he must send in troops to protect them from what? And that also, I watched this morning on one of the talk shows, I had on CBS had on the Poland Prime Minister. Well, there's lots of Russian-speaking parts of Poland. The same thing is true about Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Hell, there's there's Russian-speaking parts of Hungary and Romania. No matter what it is, we may look back in 10 or 20 years, if we're able to look back on this thing and say that was the start of World War III. Because you have the information, you're a soldier, you're a doctor, you're a congressman. And for those who say we don't have a dog in this fight, it was so odd that America sent representatives to Munich, like Chamberlain, to talk to the evildoer. And let's face it, Vladimir Putin is a bloodthirsty murderer. He's a KGB agent. He has no human rights that he's going to follow with anyone in the world. He's going to do what he's got to do. So can you make the argument, which is resisting, especially me and many others, saying we have no role in Ukraine, leave it alone? what argument could you make that we should not leave it alone? And no one is saying to send in troops. That would be stupid. To send American soldiers into Ukraine would be stupid. They would be slaughtered. And we can't, it looked like Afghanistan again. But before we talk about the tactics, why should Americans care about Ukraine?
Because anywhere that we lose democracies in the world is a danger to us and a threat to us. And especially when we're losing it to a power that wants to destroy and get rid of the United States of America. And so it's an institutional type of creep. And, you know, I think it is wrong to think that this is nothing, because it is definitely something, because it's really a situation of democracy versus authoritarianism. It's freedom versus oppression, if you will. You know, you don't see Spain saying, we're going to go take over Mexico because there's people there that speak Spanish, right?
Yeah.
And not only that, the people in Ukraine that are Russian speaking have every opportunity to move to Russia. There's plenty of land, there's plenty of space. They can move to Russia if they truly want to be part of Russia. You know, this has been going on for some time. This isn't just a movement taking place right now. Russia has been doing this. When I went to Ukraine before Christmas, I attended a ceremony that they have all but 6 days a year. On that day, they ring the bell for every Ukrainian that's been killed by Russians since 2014. There's only 6 days of the year that hasn't happened. And so this has been going on for some time. This is an aggressive regime, if you will, in Russia today. And appeasement invites aggression. And that's what we're seeing taking place. So we do have the obligation as leaders of the free world to defend the free world and do it economically if we can. No, we don't want to send in troops. But the Ukrainians aren't even asking for that. But what they have been asking for is help. They've been asking for help militarily as far as equipment, and we should have been stocking up on that for some time. We can also deploy more things into Eastern Europe, where we now have friends and allies, where people that were formerly under the rule of the Soviet Union. We should have been doing this for some time, letting Russia and the Russian people be on notice that this is not something you can just go do. You don't have the right to do it, and we will stand up for sovereign nations, especially democrat nations.
You know, Congressman, this is one of the most telegraphed acts of the past 20 years. If you go back, and I spent some time on YouTube looking at some of the remarks of Vladimir Putin when he looked completely differently than 25 years ago, and he freely said that the greatest catastrophe of the last half of the 20th century was not World War II. No. It was the fact the USSR was broken up, and they did it to themselves in 1991. And he wants to get the band back together. He wants to get the empire back together. And so looking back in time, if the Western world does not stand up against Russian aggression in the Ukraine, the next step's going to be Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Poland. And then where are we? And the fact of the matter is, because it is a hyperactive nuclear power with the ability with tactical local nukes and also intercontinental ballistic missiles, we could look, I said this in one of my tweets, the end of civilization as we know it. I can't imagine the 6,000 nukes that each country has between America and Russia, exchanging 6,000 nuclear weapons with hundreds of millions of Americans dead. I'm looking at this thing and I'm thinking, I can't believe it. But hasn't he been telegraphing this for more than 20 years? And we weren't paying attention, especially in 2014. Obama, Biden were not paying attention. It is telegraphed. He said he was going to do it. Now he's doing it. We're 20 years down the road. But is the scenario that I just brought up about hundreds of millions of dead Americans, is that possible?
Well, we hope not. You know, when you talk about nuclear, you know, remember Chernobyl is in Ukraine, and part of the deal was they would give up all their well, not just, that was a nuclear reactor, but they gave up all of their nuclear capabilities that were part of the Soviet Union that were in Ukraine. And so now that left them somewhat defenseless as far as being a nuclear sovereign nation. But the deal was that they would be a sovereign nation. And that was a deal made with Russia. But we can't continue to wait for further invasion to act. We need to put the crippling sanctions there. We should have been, and we have a bill that House Republicans have put forward that would increase the Ukrainians' air defense, their anti-armor, anti-ship capabilities. And we can continue to put U.S. military exercises in Europe as a show of strength. So there's a lot that we can do and we should be doing and should have been doing, but it hasn't been taking place. And again, it's appeasement and taking full advantage of it at a time that you start to wonder in America, how much is this president even in favor of democracy, especially when you see some of the tyrannical actions that he's taking, like putting mandates on people for vaccines.
Now, imagine if we were free of any oil, natural gas concerns at this point. Imagine if America was exporting natural gas and liquefied natural gas and oil. Imagine if we had a circumstance where that Europe could turn toward America for all of its energy needs. We don't have that because of Joe Biden. God knows what he's doing. Can you make the argument to the butchers, the bakers, the candlestick makers, Bob the bricklayer types who work with their hands, those who drive trucks for the post office, and those who stand behind counters, as far as this particular crisis? They look at the southern border where 100,000, 200,000 Americans are dead every year from the fentanyl made in communist red China, shipped to Mexico, brought across the southern border because the communist red Chinese want to destroy the country. We lose 100,000 to 200,000 Americans every year. We have 1 million or more illegal aliens. 71% of Americans say, Congressman, that's wrong. The great majority of Democrats say that's wrong. We can't have that. So why are we more concerned about the Ukrainian borders than the Mexican border? Can you make that argument as to why we have different policies when the Mexican border at this point is much more dangerous to us than the Ukrainian border? Why do we care more about Eastern Europe than the southern border of our country?
Well, I would say that probably the Americans that are concerned about Russian advancement and crossing the Ukrainian border are the same Americans that have the concerns about our southern border. And so there we stand together that we're a sovereign nation and our border shouldn't be fluid on the south side. And we think that Ukraine is a sovereign nation and their border is not fluid or able to be taken by a foreign entity. So I think you're talking about the same people thinking the same thing. The question is, why does President Biden think it's okay on the southern border, and why was he not doing enough to prevent Russia from doing it on the Ukrainian border? You see what I mean? I think there's two schools of thought here. So he seems to be acquiescing, and maybe they're trying to save some face by saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But actions speak louder than words. They always have. And so we need to have some action. But it's the same premise. I have just as much concern about our southern border and more so than I do about the Ukrainian border. But in being in favor of democratic, free countries around the world, I don't want to see Russian advancement. I don't want to see Chinese advancement.
No, and in fact, remember the old days, maybe you're too young to remember, Tony Bender does, the Sino-Soviet alliances of the 1950s, in which the communist parties in Red China and Russia, and then USSR, got together, and they were going to dominate the world, but it didn't work that way. But now you got the communist red Chinese about to launch, we think, attacks on Taiwan, which would be a disaster economically for the world. Then you got Russia on the march into Eastern Europe. If somebody would have said to you a few years ago, there's going to be a large army and a large war, a land war happening in Central Europe involving hundreds of thousands of soldiers, those who may not be up to the snuff on what you know on the intelligence committee would say, what are you talking about? That somehow the average American cannot conceive of a 1941 type invasion of an Eastern European country by a totalitarian left-wing regime, Vladimir Putin, resulting in the death of hundreds of thousands. When you, lastly, about 2 minutes remaining, when you were in the Ukraine just before Christmas, did you have a sense that the Ukrainian people would fight? They have an army of about 250,000, and they have modern armaments. Did you have a sense in December they would fight like warrior poets for their country, or would they collapse?
No, I have the sense that they will fight. It's just how will they fight and what type of warfare will they be able to conduct? Because in a conventional war, they are clearly outnumbered. But that doesn't mean they won't fight. I feel that they're very determined to put up a fight. And I think that in part, strategically, that if there's going to be this invasion, if there's going to be a fight, that the effect of Russians coming home in body bags may change the political dynamics within Russia and cause Putin to back out. That would be, I think, their hope. But that's why I certainly want for us to give them as much help as we possibly can, because they do want to fight. It is their fight, and they know it. And they're not asking the United States to send troops. They are asking the United States to help them with sanctioning Russia, with doing things against Russia, against their actions, and also increasing their capability to defend themselves. That's what they're asking for from the United States of America, and we should be providing it.
I've heard some say that if Trump was in the White House, this would not be going on. I don't know what would have happened, because Putin has been saying this for 20, 25 years. He tipped his hand. He said what he's going to do. He's now doing it. And as far as killing hundreds of thousands of innocent people in a country of 40 million, Kiev is 3 million people. I mean, Kiev is like 10 times the size of the city of Cincinnati. And to send tens of thousands of artillery shells and howitzers into that environment, killing men, women, and children indiscriminately, in order to what? To save them from what? In fact, all these countries that have left Russia, all of them learned they want to go west. They don't want to have totalitarianism and government control. And as you said, if you're in the Ukraine and you want to live in Russia right now, go east. Go live in Russia. It's okay. Mm-hmm. But I can recall in the good old days at St. Savior Parish, we used to say, Mother of God, save Russia. And that was expressed at every religious ceremony for a long time. And maybe it applies again today. But Congressman, good luck to you. I wanted to get into some political matters, but we don't have the time. But I know you're in between meetings this afternoon. And once again, thank you for coming on the Bill Cunningham Show. And Congressman will do it again. And thank you for your insight.
Thank you very much, Bill. Have a good day.
Brad Wenstrup.